So in this video, we're talking about Vladimir Nabokov. Not Nabokov as an artist, but as an art critic. Most of what he says about art, he says specifically about the art of literature, but we can easily apply it to most other mediums. He's a guy with strong, perhaps extreme opinions about art, but you don't have to agree with everything he says to find this video useful. He's a guy with a unique perspective and values, so you can learn to appreciate some of the things he does without necessarily having to agree on their level of importance. Or if you just hate everything he has to say, then at least you found an interesting guy to be your new nemesis. Alright then, let's get started with Vladimir Nabokov. So, what for Nabokov is the value of art? What are we supposed to get out of it? There are 3 points of view from which a writer can be considered. He may be considered as a storyteller, as a teacher, and as an enchanter. So, for Nabokov, there are 3 main categories of things people get out of art. From the storyteller, we get entertainment, which includes like plot and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Also relating to the characters and getting emotionally invested in the story. And of course, plain old escapism, getting to leave your boring life and visit a fantasy world with heroes and villains. The next category is lessons, which is what we get from the teacher. This includes big, general political and philosophical ideas, also wisdom and how you should live, and simple, basic facts, like what's it like to live in Russia 100 years ago or something like that. For Nabokov, none of the things we've listed so far are what really make art worth it. To him, all these things are trash compared to what's in the third category, which he calls enchantment. It is here we come to the really exciting part, when we try to grasp the individual magic of the author's genius, to study the style, the imagery, the pattern of his novels or poems. Style and structure are the essence of a book. Great ideas are hogwash. Those are strong words, but this feels a little vaguer than the other 2 categories. Other critics who think style and structure are the most important thing would probably use words like beauty or aesthetics in place of enchantment, but Nabokov does not have exactly the same views as those other people. And if you use those words, it would be just as vague. And to be fair, you kinda have to be vague talking about this stuff. Because if you're saying what makes a book good is the individual unique style, then the thing that makes it good is different in every single case. You can't quite hold it down. Though there are a few constants that you can. For Nabokov, this is what they are. The virtues that characterize all worthwhile art. Originality, invention, conciseness, harmony, complexity, and splendid insincerity. Originality, because for a style to be individual, it can't be the same as everything else. It has to be unique. Invention, because originality doesn't just come automatically. You actively have to use some creativity and imagination if you're going to find a new way of doing things. And harmony, because for a style to be individual, the work of art needs to be a single unified whole with a discernible pattern. It can't just be a loosely connected mess of things. The other 3, conciseness, complexity, and splendid insincerity, we'll talk about later. But first, in order to better understand what he means by enchantment and what he's looking for in art, we're going to talk about how Nabokov thinks we should look at art. Specifically, how he thinks we should read a book, and why he thinks that's actually impossible. Curiously enough, one cannot read a book. One can only reread it. A good reader, a major reader, and active and creative reader is a rereader. So he thinks it's important to read a book more than once. Why? Well, for him, when we're reading, we have no physical organ, as we have the eye in regard to a painting, that takes in the whole picture. Right? We can see a painting all at once, but we can't read a book all at once. It takes time to go through. But if we've read the book before, we can see the whole thing in our heads. And then we can enjoy the details. Okay, what's so important about seeing the whole thing and enjoying the details? Well, for Nabokov, appreciating the individual style and pattern of a book means appreciating every detail and how it connects to every other detail, how everything connects to form both simultaneously the book and the world created by the book. He wants us to pay attention to the details of how individual words are used on the page, but also the physical details of the book's world. We must see things and hear things. We must visualize the rooms, the clothes, the manners of an author's people. The color of Fanny Price's eyes in Mansfield Park and the furnishings of her cold little room are important. Nabokov would often sketch scenes, places, and things from books he was reading, and make his students do the same thing. He wants us to get sucked into the world of the book, but not so we can get emotionally involved with the characters. Share not the emotions of the people in the book, but the emotions of its author. The joys and difficulties of creation. He wants us to get sucked into the author's world, but simultaneously stand outside of that living, breathing world and keep in mind somebody made this up. This living, breathing world is an illusion, and a human being created it, and that's why he calls it enchantment, because it's magic. We're being tricked. And the joy of magic is not just being tricked, it's also knowing how the trick was done, and best of all, both, being tricked while also knowing how the trick was done at the same time. That's why he wants us both in and outside of the author's world, so we can appreciate simultaneously the trick and how the trick is done. And that brings us back to splendid insincerity. I discovered in nature the non-utilitarian delights that I sought in art. Both were a form of magic. Both were a game of intricate enchantment and deception. Nabokov likes to call art both magic and a game. It's a game because, unlike magic, art is interactive. It's up to us to use our imagination to help the author create his world. Ultimately, we're the ones tricking ourselves. And in doing so, we get to feel the joys and difficulties of creation, because we are creating alongside the author. Seeing and hearing the book in your head and seeing and hearing the world of the book are not something the author does for you. It's something you do yourself, and there isn't just one way to do it. Nabokov calls literary masterpieces those wonderful toys, and it's up to you how you play with them. If you want to know a book forward and back and know every detail, why not read it once forwards and once backwards? What about once out loud and once in your head? Why not once read it over the course of a day and once over the course of a year? What about acting it out? What about sketching scenes? What about memorizing? For Nabokov, art is not a passive experience. It's active and it's fun. Now back to that list of virtues. Here's the full quote. Chess problems demand from the composer the same virtues that characterize all worthwhile art. Even here he's comparing art with a game, and I think now we're ready to understand the full list. Complexity, because Nabokov wants a richly detailed work of art and world created by that art, and conciseness, because you only get so much words or paint to achieve that complexity, and you're only really doing magic if you're creating a lot from a little. And splendid insincerity is necessary, because for Nabokov, art must be a trick. He doesn't like non-objectivist painters, for instance, like Jackson Pollock, because he doesn't just want to see paint put on a canvas, he wants to be lied to. And here's where most people would think he's a bit extreme. He doesn't like music for the same reason. This is where he's different from other critics who think style and structure is the most important thing, because music can have style and structure. It can be original, it can be inventive, it can be concise, it can have harmony, it can be complex, but it can't lie. For him, illusion is absolutely necessary. Though that doesn't mean that the best art is what's most convincing or most realistic. Because for Nabokov, reality is not something to be imitated, but to be invented. For Nabokov, it's not only reading that's a game, it's also writing. And for the writer, everything is his toy. Look at the harlequins all around you. Trees are harlequins, words are harlequins. Play, invent the world, invent reality. The art of writing is a very futile business if it does not imply, first of all, the art of seeing the world as the potentiality of fiction. For Nabokov, the writer must be able to see everything as something they can use for their work. That includes all of nature and the works of other people. A creative writer must carefully study the works of all his rivals, including the Almighty. He must possess the inborn capacity not only of recombining but of recreating the given world. In order to do this adequately, avoiding duplication of labor, the artist must know the given world. So you should know nature to avoid imitating it, and the more you know, the more you can create, because sadly you can only create things similar to the things you already know. It's a pity one can't imagine what one can't compare anything to. Genius is an African who dreams up snow. Now for further reading. Nabokov was primarily a novelist and did not actually publish that much art criticism. He actually sums up many of his ideas about art criticism in a single short essay, Good Readers and Good Writers. It's only a few pages, it's available online for free, and there will be a link in the description. Another way to find out how Nabokov thinks books should be written is to read one of his books. A good place to start is Lolita. It's told from the perspective of a pedophile, but if that doesn't make you too uncomfortable, it's definitely worth it. Also in the back of Lolita, there's another essay that outlines a lot of his opinions, called On a Book Entitled Lolita. Yet another way to find out what he thinks makes a good book is to see what books he recommends. Somebody's made a webpage listing a lot of the books he likes and doesn't like. If you at least partially agree with Nabokov, it can be a useful list of finding things to read, and if you don't like him, it'll be a useful list to find books to avoid. Finally, what we didn't get to do in this video was talk about specific books and study their structure and style. That's what Nabokov actually does in his lectures on literature. It's a big commitment because presumably you're going to read all the books that he's doing lectures about, but it could change the way you read forever and make you a happier person, and it's pretty good, and I'm done making this video. Bye.